Imagine standing alone against the world, fighting not just for survival, but for the truth. David Matthews thought he was protecting his land, until the real battle began. Before we dive into this powerful story, let us know where you're tuning in from. If you're moved by tales of courage and change, hit that subscribe button. We've got another unforgettable story coming your way tomorrow. Stay tuned. David Matthews, a rugged 58-year-old farmer, stood at the edge of his 80-acre farm as the early morning light painted the fields in soft golds and oranges. His hands, weathered by decades of working the land, gripped the worn wooden fence as he surveyed his crops. Redwood County, a quiet town nestled in the heart of America's agricultural heartland, had seen better days. The drought had turned the once thriving community into a ghost town of dried-up fields and boarded-up stores. Unlike most of the other farmers, who had turned to genetically modified crops and synthetic fertilizers to stay afloat, David refused to abandon the traditional methods passed down from his father. He believed in natural farming the old way, the way that honored the land. It was a principle that had kept him grounded, but it was also the reason his farm was struggling. He knew that times were changing and that his resistance to modern farming techniques was making life harder, but he couldn't bring himself to compromise his values. He looked out over his land with a mixture of pride and concern. This farm was more than just soil and crops. It was his legacy, and he wasn't ready to give it up. The phone call came just after sunset. David was sitting on the porch, nursing a cup of black coffee, staring at the horizon. His daughter, Lily, had been calling more often these days, but tonight's call felt different. Her voice, normally bright and filled with ambition, trembled on the other end. "Dad, it's about the scholarship," she began, her words stumbling. I didn't get enough to cover the rest of my tuition. I don't know what to do." David's heart sank. Lily, his only child, had dreamed of becoming a doctor ever since she was little. Her acceptance into college had been his one glimmer of hope amidst the endless struggle to keep the farm alive. Now, it seemed like that dream was slipping away. He sat there for a moment, listening to the muffled sobs on the other end of the line, unable to think of anything to say that would make things better. How could he fix this? His savings were practically gone. His pride wouldn't let him accept charity. But what could he do? That night, after the call, David decided to go into town. Maybe a change of scenery would help clear his mind. As he walked past the old diner, a man caught his eye, a tall, broad-shouldered figure leaning against the wall. His military jacket faded from years of wear. His face, scarred by time and experience, seemed worn, but not defeated. David felt a sudden impulse, something unexplainable, drawing him toward the man. "Need some work?" David asked, his voice rough with uncertainty. The man looked up, his tired eyes meeting David's. "I'm looking for something steady," he replied. "I've been out of the army a few months now. Got skills with machines, farm work, anything you need." David studied the stranger. Something about him seemed different from the usual drifters or hustlers that passed through Redwood County. The man didn't seem like someone who'd caused trouble. Still, the town had warned him about people like him, men with military backgrounds, people who often came with baggage, but David didn't care about rumors. He was desperate, and the thought of having someone around to help on the farm felt like a small miracle. "I could use a hand on the farm," David said, surprising himself with his own words. "How soon can you start?" The next morning, David was already up before dawn, his mind still buzzing with the previous night's decision. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Ethan Miller, the man he had met in town, arrived at the farm. David watched as Ethan climbed out of an old, battered truck, his boots kicking up dust as he made his way over. He was a man of few words, his gaze steady and his posture rigid, someone who had clearly seen things that had left their mark. David didn't ask questions, figuring that sometimes it's better to let people speak for themselves. He showed Ethan the basics, feeding the animals, checking the irrigation lines, and fixing some of the broken fences. Despite Ethan's quiet demeanor, there was something undeniably competent about him. His movements were deliberate, efficient. As the day wore on, David began to feel a sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, this would work. But that relief was short-lived. As the sun sank low in the sky, David noticed a line of black SUVs parked just off the road, their tinted windows barely visible through the trees. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't recognize any of the vehicles. "Who are they?" David asked, his voice tight as he approached Ethan, who was adjusting some of the irrigation pipes. Ethan's face turned pale. He stood stock still for a moment before he spoke, his voice low. "They're here for me," he said quietly, as if it pained him to admit it. David's heart skipped a beat. He had been wrong to think that Ethan was just a simple man looking for work. Something far more complicated was at play. Ethan's past, the one he had kept hidden behind his calm exterior, was now catching up with him. Without saying another word, Ethan walked toward the trucks, but before he could reach them, one of the men stepped out, a tall figure dressed in black tactical gear. The man's gaze shifted between Ethan and David, his eyes narrowing. "You're not welcome here," he said, his voice cold. David instinctively stepped between them, his hands raised. "What's going on? What do you want with him?" The man smirked, stepping closer. "This doesn't concern you, old man," he said, his tone dripping with menace. "Stay out of it." But David couldn't stay out of it, not when it involved someone he had already decided to trust. His instincts told him that Ethan was no criminal, but the situation was growing more dangerous by the second. And David realized that the quiet life he had fought so hard to protect was now at risk in ways he never imagined. The tension in the air thickened as the man in tactical gear took a step closer to David, his eyes cold and calculating. David didn't move. He stood his ground, feeling a surge of protectiveness for Ethan, a man he barely knew, but one he instinctively felt was worth trusting. The standoff was broken when Ethan suddenly stepped forward, his hand held out to calm the situation. "David, it's okay," Ethan said, his voice steady, but there was an edge of pain in it. "You don't need to get involved." David turned to Ethan, searching his face. "You're saying they're here for you. Who are they? What's really going on?" "Ethan." Ethan hesitated for a long moment before he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're from Valkyrie Security, a private military contractor. I used to work for them, but I refused to keep doing the things they asked of me, things I couldn't live with." He looked back at the men in the SUVs. "I walked away, and now they're here to make sure I don't get any ideas about talking." David's stomach turned as he processed the words. Ethan wasn't just a man down on his luck, trying to make a living on a farm. He was running from a past filled with shadowy figures, and those figures were closing in fast. The men in the SUVs were still watching them, their postures stiff, waiting for something. David felt the weight of the situation settling on him. He wasn't a soldier, nor was he some brave hero. He was a farmer. But in that moment, he realized that he couldn't just stand by and watch an innocent man get dragged back into something that didn't belong here. Ethan had trusted him, and now it was time for David to return that trust. "I'm not backing down," David said, his voice surprisingly firm. "If they want you, they'll have to go through me first." Ethan stared at him, a flicker of disbelief in his eyes. "You don't know what they're capable of." David nodded, but his resolve didn't waver. maybe not. But I know that you've done nothing wrong, and that's good enough for me." The men in the SUVs exchanged glances, their patience wearing thin. Ethan stepped closer to David, his face hardening with a new determination. "All right then, old man, if you're in, we face this together." The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. And as the dark silhouettes of the SUVs loomed closer, David knew one thing for certain: this wasn't just about saving the farm anymore. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The standoff between David and the men from Valkyrie Security dragged on for what felt like hours. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the farm. But David remained rooted in place. The tension in the air was thick, and the men in the SUVs seemed to be waiting for a reason to escalate things further. Ethan stood beside him, his eyes constantly scanning the men, his hands flexing in the way of someone prepared for a fight. But David noticed something in his posture. He was tired. Tired of running, tired of fighting, and tired of being a pawn in someone else's game. David, however, was not ready to back down. His farm, his land, and his family were all that mattered to him now, and he would be damned if he was going to let these men take either one. Just as the silence was about to break, a faint rumble echoed through the distance. David turned to see a group of trucks from the town's volunteer fire department pulling up the long gravel driveway. In the lead truck was Mayor Tom Caldwell, a stout man in his early 60s who had known David for most of his life. The sight of the trucks brought a surge of relief. Help was here, even if it had come in the form of a small-town militia. David glanced at Ethan, whose expression softened ever so slightly. "Looks like you've got more friends than you thought," he said quietly. Ethan nodded, his voice grim. "I didn't think anyone would be willing to help." David smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised how much people will do when they know what's at stake." The convoy of trucks stopped at the edge of the field, and Mayor Caldwell stepped out, followed by several other town members, all armed with nothing more than determination and a few old hunting rifles. The mayor walked toward David and Ethan, his face set in a hard line. "We're not going to let these goons push us around," Caldwell said, his voice steady. "Redwood County has always taken care of its own, and we take care of our own, no matter what." David felt a weight lift off his shoulders. The community, the people who had lived and struggled alongside him for years, had come through. They weren't just here for the farm. They were here for Ethan too, even if they didn't fully understand his past. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that they were standing together, ready to protect what was theirs. The men from Valkyrie Security hesitated, sensing the shift in power. They clearly weren't expecting this kind of resistance from a group of locals. Tensions flared once more, but it was clear that they had lost the element of surprise. Ethan turned to David, gratitude shining in his eyes. "I never thought I'd see the day when Redwood County would stand with me," he said softly. David met his gaze and smiled. Sometimes it just takes one person to remind others what's worth fighting for. As the town rallied behind them, David realized something. This wasn't just about protecting the farm anymore. It was about proving that no matter how dark things got, there would always be a light, even if it came from the most unexpected places. The standoff, though intense, eventually fizzled out. The Valkyrie Security team, sensing they were outmatched, packed up their vehicles and retreated from the farm without firing a shot. The town's collective resistance, a mix of farmers, shopkeepers, and a few curious townsfolk, had made it clear that Redwood County wasn't going to be bullied by outsiders. But for David and Ethan, the victory wasn't just in sending the threat away, it was in the unspoken bond that had formed between them. In the days that followed, the town of Redwood began to heal. The farm, which had been a symbol of David's struggles, had now become something more. It was a symbol of resilience. With the help of Ethan and the townsfolk, they patched up the broken fences, restored the irrigation systems, and began working the fields together. But the change wasn't just in the land, it was in the people. Ethan, once a soldier haunted by the shadows of his past, began to settle into life on the farm. The long, hard hours of manual labor, the hum of the tractors, and the smell of fresh earth seemed to ground him in a way that nothing else had. He was no longer running. He had found a place where he was needed, where his skills could be used for something good. The quiet, steady rhythm of farm life helped ease the weight of his memories, and he started to rebuild a sense of peace within himself. David, too, experienced a shift. He had always been proud of his farm, but now he found a renewed sense of purpose in it. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, about the values his father had instilled in him, about community, and about standing up for what was right. As he worked alongside Ethan, David realized that his decision to stand by the man had not only saved his farm, but had also brought the community closer together. They had all seen firsthand the power of loyalty, of doing the right thing even when it wasn't easy. Lily, too, had her own transformation. Though the financial struggle wasn't entirely over, the scholarship issue had been resolved with the help of the town's fundraisers and donations. But more importantly, she had witnessed her father's unwavering commitment to his values, and she saw the strength that came from standing up for what was right. It inspired her to keep pushing through her own challenges with the same perseverance and integrity. As the seasons passed, David's farm flourished once more. But this time, it wasn't just a place of work. It was a symbol of resilience, of hope, and of the power of community. And as he looked out over his fields, David knew that he had not only preserved his father's legacy, but he had also created something even more valuable, a legacy of his own. The harvest came in early that year, a small miracle in itself. The fields, once dry and cracked under the weight of a relentless drought, now stood tall with golden stalks of wheat and rows of vibrant crops. David walked through the fields, his boots sinking slightly into the rich, damp soil. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to relax, to simply breathe in the earthy scent of the land that had been his life's work. The farm, once hanging by a thread, now thrived not just from the hard labor, but from something deeper. It wasn't just the crops that were flourishing, it was the community itself, the town of Redwood County, which had been divided for so long by suspicion and fear, had united in a way that no one could have imagined. What had started as a simple act of standing up for a man in need had turned into a collective force that had brought people together. Neighbors who once avoided each other now helped each other, not just with farming, but with everything. The shared experience of standing up to a common enemy had bonded them in ways they could never have foreseen. David smiled as he watched Ethan, his partner in this unexpected journey, working alongside the rest of the crew. Ethan had transformed from a man haunted by his past to a man whose future now seemed as steady and certain as the fields he tilled. He was no longer the lone soldier running from his demons. He had found a new purpose here, among the people who had accepted him despite his dark past. The two of them had become an unlikely team, a duo bound not just by work but by a deeper understanding of what it meant to fight for something worth saving. They had fought for the farm, for the community, and for each other. And in the end, that fight had brought about more than just a physical victory, it had brought about a spiritual one as well. In the evening light, as David stood beside Ethan at the edge of the field, he realized something important. The farm was more than just soil and crops. It was a testament to the power of second chances, to the value of loyalty, and to the unshakable strength that comes from community. The journey had been hard, but it had been worth it. David turned to Ethan, a knowing look in his eyes. "We did it, didn't we?" Ethan nodded, his face breaking into a rare, genuine smile. "Yeah, we did." The farm wasn't just a place of work anymore. It was a place of hope, of resilience, and of redemption. And as the sun set over the land, casting long shadows across the fields, David knew that no matter what came next, they were ready. They had already faced their darkest moments, and together, they had emerged stronger than ever. The future, though uncertain, now held endless possibilities both for the farm and for the people of Redwood County. The battle had been won, but the story was only just beginning. As the months passed, David and Ethan continued to work side by side. But more than just the farm was thriving. It was their understanding of life that had been forever changed. David had learned that standing up for what was right, no matter the cost, could lead to unexpected rewards. He had protected his land, his values, and ultimately, the community that had become like family. For Ethan, the farm had become a sanctuary. The quiet, honest labor allowed him to put his past behind him. And for the first time in years, he felt like he belonged. The support from David and the townspeople had shown him that redemption wasn't just about running from your past, it was about embracing your future. Together, they had learned that sometimes the greatest victories come not from what you keep, but from what you're willing to risk for the ones you care about. The real power lay in community, loyalty, and the courage to fight for what was right. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more inspiring content. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share how you would have stood up for what's right.